Before we go into strategic discussions about how to prepare for your 2022 Microsoft licensing and negotiations, let's recap quickly what happened in 2021 and some of the pain points our customers have seen over the year. Everybody thought that we could just forget about on-premise licensing and put our focus on cloud and Azure and Office 365, of course. That promise hasn't matured. On-premise licensing is here to stay. We must probably going to be dealing and managing on-premise licensing for the next 5 years at minimum. In addition, complex hybrid licensing rights are just adding another layer of complexity to the overall puzzle of licensing. Now you have to manage both on-premise licensing and your hybrid benefits that you receive with your server estate on your various cloud installments, being Microsoft Azure or AWS or Google. One more layer that needs to be dealt with on top of the standard on-premise layer. Tools have been around for 10 years plus to manage your on-premise licensing. They have matured to the next phase of managing your cloud environments, but still they don't do everything. The human factor is key to a successful cost management and complexity management of licensing, of the hybrid benefits, and increasing costs of pay-as-you-go and of Office 365. So we need to take a different approach when looking at the tools and take into consideration that you need highly qualified, trained, experienced professionals that are managing the various tools. And there's not one tool that provides a 360-degree solution. We've spoken to many CFOs over the last 12 months, and there's one thing in common. Budgets are out of control. CFOs are seeing over 35% cost increases over budget on Azure and on Office 365. The CFOs are not only dealing with increased costs, they are dealing with the move from CapEx recognition, capital expense, to operational expenses, OpEx expenses rising. And that's always tough when you're a CFO and you're a publicly traded company. You always want to control your operational expense. And the cloud has changed things completely around. There's just another level of complexity that CFOs need to deal with. And there's no easy solution around that. Multi-cloud environments, the big promise of easy migration and transition between Microsoft, AWS, Google Cloud, hasn't materialized. So there's no easy way to move between clouds. But the best practice still is, in order to contain your costs and have negotiation leverage, is to introduce a multi-cloud approach. What we've seen during 2021 are organizations that are adding more than one cloud environment to their infrastructure for multiple reasons. One, as we said, negotiation leverage. Two, alternatives. So you're not a captured customer with one vendor and you have the flexibility to move between multiple vendors. Organizations are being audited. No, external audits are going down, but internal audits are going up. Our customers are seeing increased pressure by internal compliance and audit and governance units that are validating and auditing their own predictions and budgets on cloud spend. That links back to what the CFOs are seeing. And when the audit teams are coming in, what they are seeing is that predictions, budgets, and plans are basically thrown completely out the window. And then there's increased pressure internally by these audit teams on IT and on various business groups to prove and validate their initial assumptions. So we've taken a quick look at the challenges of 2021. The result of those challenges is the benefit of Microsoft. Server and cloud revenue is up by 27%, over $41 billion. Office and cloud services are up 11%. That's over $35 billion worth of revenue. So the trend is obvious. Increased complexity, a huge trend towards the cloud. And we know COVID-19 was an accelerator for that. And digital transformation, also part of that trend. So the pain points we are seeing within our customer base and organizations globally result ultimately in better financial results for Microsoft. There's nothing wrong with that. But on the other hand, it is your responsibility to prepare for the next fiscal year. So for your organization, you're doing whatever is possible to contain costs and optimize your current and future environment. A new approach is needed, a 360 approach. It's a holistic view of your Microsoft financial expenses. It's FinOps, it's on-premise licensing, it's unified support, and it's best practices around bring your own licenses or Azure hybrid benefits. So it's 4 components that need to be managed as a whole. And around that, you have the human factor. Because to manage the complexity of your Microsoft environment needs skilled professionals that can see the entire picture of your Microsoft relationship. Microsoft, as we know, like to work in silos. They like to negotiate first your enterprise agreement, then separately negotiate your Azure. A different team manages unified support completely. Part of your strategic approach in 2022 needs to unify your relationship with Microsoft. You need to change the way they work with you. You need to have a one negotiation motion. They need to recognize your entire value of the relationship and not divide and conquer the various cost elements of the relationship. So you need to first look at what your on-premise contract looks like. You need to validate that there's no overspend there. You need to realize and have an excellent understanding of your bring your own license Azure hybrid benefits. You need to financially plan how to utilize those licenses as part of your overall Azure strategy and maximize your return on investment from your current infrastructure and contracts. You need to financially plan what your Azure commitments are going to look like and what your consumption is going to look like. You need to continuously monitor your Azure spend, optimize at an ongoing basis, and be in contact continuously with the team that's managing the on-premise environment in order to utilize your bring your own license benefits. And then you need to add on, if you are a unified support customer, the overall cost for unified support and understand how unified support is part of that overall relationship. Once you combine everything together into a holistic view, you can build a new relationship with Microsoft. You can leverage the various components of your overall spend with Microsoft. You need to get Microsoft to view you as a strategic end-to-end customer, not just as an enterprise agreement customer or a CSP customer, but a combination of on-premise, Azure, Office 365, and unified support. So going into 2022, what can we do different? What are the actions that we can take tomorrow in order to mitigate some of those risks that we've talked about? The number one action that you can take tomorrow is start preparing for the Microsoft price increase coming in March. This is huge. Prices are going up on average between 8 and 25%. And there are other nuances that are going to come into play in the CSP programs that when you look at your overall cost increase, it can reach 50-55%. Microsoft deliberately are not increasing the Microsoft 365 E5 offering. And that's obvious. They want everything else, all the components to go up, to be more expensive. So the 365 E5 offering just looks that much better. Don't be in a rush to move to 365 E5 because that will go up as well. And then your next renewal will be even more costly. Those of you that have got agreements up for renewal, second quarter, third quarter of next year, look at an early renewal. Start negotiations with Microsoft January 1st. Try and get that renewal in before the price increase. That potentially in the next 3 years can save you anything between 10 and 20% on your predicted spend. Unified support. Enterprise organizations that have had a long ongoing relationship with Microsoft, starting with the old days of the Premier agreement that migrated to the unified support contracts, have realized tremendous cost increases. The whole way that the unified support agreements are structured are based on a percentage of your actual Azure and enterprise agreement spend. So the more you spend, the more you're paying for your support agreement. It doesn't mean that you're actually receiving more, you're just paying more. And if you ask Microsoft for clarification on what is the baseline and how do they calculate the baseline, you'll receive multiple answers to the same question. So what can you do about your next unified support contract? First of all, create a baseline that both Microsoft and yourself agree upon. What are the metrics? You can negotiate the percentages on which the agreement is based. And most important, have a BATNA, a best alternative to a negotiated agreement. And in Microsoft Unified Support case, introduce third-party support. There are organizations out there that are providing Microsoft support based on the old Premier model that is very transparent. You can follow the metrics. The pricing is open, is much more competitive than what Microsoft is providing. That in itself will provide you with that leverage you need to negotiate a better deal. And we're hearing a lot about that third parties are providing just as good and sometimes even a better experience than unified support. When you negotiate with Microsoft, you need to take into account how the other side, how Microsoft sales teams are actually compensated. Because what drives Microsoft ultimately is their compensation, their bonuses, their salary increases, their promotions, just like any sales rep in the world. But the way they are compensated or measured has changed over the years. If previously they were compensated on actual revenue, it's not about what you committed to pay on your Azure cloud migration. It's about what you actually consumed. So if you understand how that sales rep is compensated, you can leverage that. And the more you start consuming or promise to consume, you can actually receive incentives for that consumption. So around Azure, if you meet a specific threshold of consumption, potentially you can get credits. You can get service credits back from Microsoft. You can request a higher discount if you're large enough and your commitments and your potential consumption are going to be significant. You can negotiate your Azure pricing. Microsoft won't tell you that. In addition, you need to have a multi-cloud provider approach and have at least one additional provider, being AWS, Google, or another party, in order to create that additional leverage that you need in the negotiations. My advice to you, don't bluff if you don't really have an alternative on the table. So for example, if it's Azure that you're negotiating, make sure you have a real alternative with AWS. Actually have an installation of some workload on AWS. If you want to have an alternative to Office 365, and yes, there are still alternatives out there, maybe G Suite, make Microsoft aware of that. Start a pilot. So no bluffing. Microsoft will see straight through that. Actually do what is needed to introduce that alternative to your organization, and then make sure Microsoft knows about it. Everybody asks us, what is the best practice on discounts? The $1,000,000 question. Microsoft's discount policy is to reduce discounts aggressively across the board. If organizations over 5,000 users were seeing discounts on average of 15, 25, even 30%, depending on the mix of products and commitments on Azure, they are seeing now on their renewals for the same bill of materials, double-digit reductions in their discounts. So discounts are down, for example, for a 5,000 plus organization from 25% to 15, 14%. The way to mitigate that is to multi-tier your negotiation approach. And the multi-tier approach is about leveraging Azure consumption, pick and choose security components, not going straight to Microsoft 365 E5, but gradually moving there, providing Microsoft with incentive to provide you with discounts, and keeping something back as part of the negotiation process. Adding in unified support to that mix will also assist in driving up discounts. And again, never be intimidated. Even though it's Microsoft, and Microsoft to many organizations and many individuals is a fearful company to negotiate with, you are ultimately negotiating with people, and people have needs and very specific goals. And if you understand those specific needs and goals of the individuals that you're working with, you know which buttons to push. And if you push the right buttons, those contacts that you have in Microsoft will be able to uplift your discount levels and provide you with additional concessions that will help you on your cloud journey. Let me leave you with some high-level takeaways. First of all, remember to anchor your price, and more importantly, anchor your profile. Is it going to be Microsoft 365 E5? Is it going to be E3? Is it going to be a combination? Our best practice is a combination of profiles to meet your workforce needs. 2, have a multiple cloud approach and let Microsoft know about it. Not only do they need to know about it, you actually need to implement a multi-cloud approach. Even if it's a small workload, make sure Microsoft knows about it. A one Microsoft negotiation motion. I think that's key to 2022. Microsoft has been really smart about conquering and dividing organizations, especially large organizations, pushing in Azure to specific business groups, selling products and projects to silo groups within the organization without notifying or bypassing decision makers. You need to be very clear with Microsoft that there is no longer a separate Azure EA unified support negotiation. It's one motion to negotiate all components. The fourth takeaway is when you enter into negotiations for your renewal of your enterprise agreement or your Azure commitment, you need to have a T-12 plan. You can't wait till the last minute. Microsoft is probably one of your most complex contracts that you have on your table. It takes 12 months to get organized and prepared. When I worked at Microsoft many years ago, I wrote the plan for the Microsoft renewal approach. Methodology started 12 months before the customer's renewal. That hasn't changed within Microsoft. And you do prepare diligently, just as Microsoft does. The fifth takeaway is LSPs, your reseller, your enterprise agreement reseller. LSPs are losing their monopoly on enterprise organizations. Microsoft has set in motion the move from EAs to CSP agreements. A CSP today is really an alternative to your current enterprise agreement. There are pros and cons compared to your enterprise agreement, but it's becoming a reality. LSPs are losing ground as CSP pricing is almost as good as an enterprise agreement, especially with Microsoft pushing down discounts. So in your next negotiation, introduce a CSP partner, maybe even 2 or 3 CSP partners. If you're a multinational, I highly recommend that you get price quotes from CSPs globally and play them against one another. So if you're going to lose leverage with Microsoft directly, move the leverage to the channel because they are the ones that have the margins and they are the ones that are compensated by Microsoft. Remember to align your negotiation strategy to Microsoft's internal compensation plans. Remember the needs of the individual that you are negotiating with. That is key. So that specific individual that you're working with that represents you within Microsoft requires the Azure consumption and the Office 365 consumption. Find ways to help him meet his goals or her goals, and they will find ways to provide you with additional incentives and discounts on your upcoming enterprise agreement or Azure renewal. And my last takeaway is on unified support. Introduce a third party to the negotiation mix and make sure you have a clear baseline on how you calculate your go-forward costs, as that is increasing not by 10-15%, it's increasing by 50 and even 100% year on year. I wish you a fruitful year of negotiations and of cost reduction. Thank you very much for joining me today.